Hi, everyone. This is Lynn Crawford with Hope Dementia Support, and I am honored to introduce you to Sue Doyle, who is an occupational therapist. And I want to let Sue introduce her to yourselves. But I also want to remind you all that if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will make sure that they get answered. So, Sue, can you tell everybody a little bit about you?
Okay, so I guess the thing to know first is that I talk a little funny. I have a tiny bit of my Australian accent left. I am an occupational therapist. I've been an occupational therapist for 45 years. I specialize now in home safety and home modifications for people across all board spectrum. And I'm having fun working towards retirement, but it doesn't seem to work quite as well as I thought it would. So how's that?
That's perfect.
All right. You want me to go ahead and
Yeah,
start my
you can go ahead and
All right. So tonight I thought I'd share a little bit about emergency preparedness and just review some of the things that I've been working on lately. And let's just see if we can get some things that are helpful to all of us. So the reason we want to talk about it is that when some kind of an emergency or disaster comes up, when we're working with someone with dementia or memory issues, they're really particularly vulnerable in this situation, both as the disaster or emergency is happening, but also afterwards, and that we have poorer outcomes, especially if we're not prepared. And outcomes can be as simple as survival, and even the fact that we can exacerbate the memory loss. In the research also shows this that less than 20% of people are prepared to handle some kind of an emergency or disaster. So I don't know who here has an emergency plan in place, but if you do, you can put it in the chat. All right. So basically, and we're seeing my slide screen, right? So basically,
yes.
what happens, good, thank you, is that when an emergency, our changes such as memory loss, poor judgment, and confusion really impact what goes on, but also just difficulty understanding what's happening and following instructions. And then because things change or are chaotic, we can also intake like that anxiety and fear, and particularly if we have to move to a different location, that gets even heightened even worse. So there are things we really want to do there. Confusion is one response, agitation is another response, or even anger, wandering in attempts to leave safety, or withdrawal and unresponsiveness. So we see people responding in all of these different ways when that happens. But there's even unique risks. One is disrupted routines, again, as we talked about communication barriers. So they can't tell us if they're in trouble usually because they often can't explain what's going on or what they're feeling. And then there's that increased risk of accidents and injuries. Now, this may result in our loved one or ourselves becoming lost, separated from safety or separated from our other loved ones, missing medications or medical care due to being displaced, and even just sensory overload with the noise or busy environments. If you can imagine being in a shelter, what that would do not only to anxiety, but just to be able to listen and understand what's happening. Then, of course, that whole routine and familiarity is disrupted. And so, again, that increases anxiety. People don't understand what's happening, and so that anxiety and fear gets there. And of course, people around them are also more fearful. So that also can be kind of contagious in that respect. So, one of the things is to expect that if we end up in an emergency situation or a disaster, to anticipate the wandering and the confusion, to prepare for that and have a plan for action, and to prioritize some safety routine and calming reassurance kind of responses so that that is being thought ahead. It's so hard when it's happening at the time and we're trying to react to the emergency that if we haven't thought ahead about how to respond, it's going to be even more difficult for us to put a safe plan or response in place. Why are we wanting to have a plan in place? Well, emergencies can happen anytime. Have people been watching the news lately, right? We're seeing all kinds of emergencies, disaster plans. It was only a couple of days ago that whole countries lost electricity, and some of those countries are going to be without it for a week. So, even just thinking about what if that happened for us, that we have some unique needs that we need to take care of, and that if we have planned for some of those things, then we've reduced our risk and our stress. All right. So, one of the things is to think about some of the disasters in our local area or emergencies that may impact you. So, what could be disasters or emergencies that you would think of? Do you want to write it in the chat or can they unmute and say? So, I would think
They
about
can
here.
raise their hand and then I can uh, let them speak if they want,
Sure.
or in the
That would be
chat
good.
or Q&A.
Okay.
Three
Yeah.
choice.
There you go. So, what are some common emergencies or disasters you would think of around here? Hopefully, we're not going to get a repeat of Mount St. Helens, but we know that it's had periods of doing that, right? They're talking about other active volcanoes in our area, with Mount Rainier having increased earthquakes. So that's going to be one. Earthquake is definitely another. Some of us may be in areas where fires in the last couple of years have come close to. Power outages with those recent storms. Oh, yes, wind. That's definitely, and with the wind often comes either down trees and limbs that are on houses or um, power outages, right? So that's kind of it. So thinking about knowing what kind of risks are in your areas. It's rare for us to get tornadoes, though we did have, in theory, a couple that have come close. And I know battleground area, and that has sometimes had some come through there. And just thinking about natural or man-made disasters. So we've had sometimes where if you're near a railway line, uh, if there's an accident on there, some chemical spills or air contamination, some of those kinds of things. We don't have to plan for all of them, but thinking about at least some of the common things that might occur. All right. So even though memory loss may be an issue or some of the insight or other planning may be an issue, we still want people to be engaged so that they have heard that somewhere before, thinking about how to do that if possible. It's not always possible, right? But where you can respect preferences or routines that you know about, use simple explanations and visual aids or um, cue cards and practice drills together if appropriate. And we were just talking about this before we came on, but I think one of the things we don't often consider is if there is a caregiver partner who is living with someone with the memory loss, Thinking about the situation with Gene Hackman and his wife, right? If you're isolated, if something happened to you as the caregiver, how long would it take someone to notice and be aware of that? So even thinking about that as a potential emergency, right? What would happen if something happened to you in that situation? And then identifying key roles, right? So is there a backup caregiver for the primary caregiver? Are there support networks, family, friends, neighbors, community organizations? And thinking about assigning roles. So, is there a neighbor that if they haven't seen you in 24 hours will come over and check? Is there a family member that calls daily to check? So, some of those things. Building your support network. So, share your plan with family and friends, inform your neighbors and nearby contacts. I'm going to talk a little bit about registering with local emergency services and special needs registries. That can be really important, particularly where clients may need assistance with evacuation or are prone to wandering. So people are aware of that and keep the emergency contact list updated. And I think there's some talk about getting some, in case of emergency, contact cards printed, right? And then with your plan, we really want to make sure everyone knows about it and that they're aware and knows their role, that you're sharing key information like, if this was to happen, here's the evacuation route I would likely take, so that if you don't get there or you don't make it to a meeting point, people are aware of how you may have made that decision. And then if it got blocked, they will know where you may have turned or whatever. Use written plans, group text, communication apps, review and update the plan regularly. And then thinking about, and I'm going to give you some planning tools later, thinking about keeping the plan simple, right? We want it to be simple. We want to practice it. We want to adjust it as things change. But you all have a lot to be doing as it is. And for me, it gets our demands on our time get more and more. So we want to be able to do this relatively quickly. So I'm going to give you some checklists that we can go through. So building the emergency kit. Some things to think about why an emergency kit matters is that it really allows us to grab something in a hurry and leave. There were some people here on the fire zone that had only 5 minutes to evacuate. So thinking about if that's potentially something for you, what were the key things that you need to do? It also reduces the stress. It also means that you can help with taking care of the person with memory loss, if needed, or if you are that person, you can think about, do I have an emergency number right near me? Have people been notified that I may need assistance if an evacuation is called for my area? So having that planned in advance is going to get us through that versus how to do that in the process or the middle when people are busy. So kinds of checklists that we need are medications, medical supplies, which may be our hearing aids, glasses, any batteries for those, mobility aids, an ID bracelet or GPS system as well. Any legal documents in here. I'm going to put power of attorney, advance directives, um, any of the related to end of life support care, comfort items, incontinence supplies, food, water, and perishable. It used to be when I started working with stuff on emergency planning, they would say 3 days, then they would say 7 days. And even now, there's talk that we should prepare in our homes for up to 2 weeks. And that's interesting because a lot of that came out with some of the changes that happened when there was some issues in Long Island. And you think Long Island is really close. I got hit by hurricane and wind stuff. And it's really close to civilization, so you think that the response is going to be immediate. For a lot of those persons, there was a 2 week delay in getting some of the resources there. And we've seen that again in North Carolina. Thinking about if we're using equipment that needs power Do we have alternatives for that, or have we notified the utility company that you rely on power for medical devices? Thinking about CPAPs, thinking about any powerlifting equipment, thinking about any power wheelchairs or any of those devices. So thinking about notifying the utility company that you rely on those from medical help. I know the utility companies, each of them have a slightly different list as to what they consider priority equipment, but you can talk to them about what that is in their areas. Um, Copies of medical information, so list of medication, diagnoses, allergies, physician contacts, code status, power of attorney, emergency contacts, and store in a waterproof bag or have it written where that's available digitally. It's really important if we're talking about reducing anxiety to include in that kit like a small photo album that has names on it, right? So that when the photos are in there, they're not just photos, but they have a name or a little bit about the person that's there. That will reduce the anxiety. Some of the favorite snacks, some simple things that they might use. So it depends on how the person may fill in their time. There may be a time where a puzzle book will work. There's a time where it doesn't. And you may, depending on where we are in this disease process, you may just need headphones or you may need earmuffs, or if the person's not used to wearing them, that may be a problem. So thinking about if they react to noise, maybe desensitizing prior to needing this with them on. All right, so one of the things to think about is notifying emergency management. And this is really important, particularly if evacuation is going to be called, because this way you can get assistance and in wandering. So I know that you have other places where we talk about wandering. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but particularly let them know, person's name, nicknames, age, medical conditions, concerns, physical description, contact information for family, friends, caregivers. One of the things to think about is, do any of the sirens from the emergency vehicles increase their fear and anxiety? Would they run away, right? And hide, where they have a history of wandering. And again, if they see someone who's a first responder, how might they react? So this way, they can send someone who may be plainclothes in an unmarked car once someone has spotted them, or if they need to get assistance. So just thinking about those kinds of things. Other things to think about, and this was an interesting one, but put together something that outlines, and I know time is um, really hard pressed for all of us. So thinking about doing just maybe one thing a week, but what is their normal routine? When do they normally wake up? When do they normally go to sleep? Do they stay asleep? What gets them upset, what calms them down, some of their usual, like, do they have a religious habit? Do they have to read the Bible at that time? So then you may want to put one in your emergency kit. Um, are there certain things they will or they won't drink? Where they currently need help. And again, we keep talking about favorite items. It seems to come up a lot on this. A spare pair of glasses, incontinence products, recent pictures of the person living with memory loss or dementia, and then pictures of family members with names. And then also familiar clothing that's easy to take on and off, because their overall ability to function at this stage will be decreased just because of the stress and the different environment. So, storing and maintaining your kit. Keep the kit in an easy to access location. Label everything. Store some items in a backpack or a rolly bag so that you can grab it quickly, while you're also managing to help with loved ones. And regularly check it. So trying to review it every 6 months. That would be helpful if you can do that. But at least thinking about, is this something I do on New Year? Is this something I do on Labor Day? Could I at least once a year address that? or have family members or other caregivers help you as well. Replace expired medications or food, update documents and contact information, and adjust the contents as the needs change. Also, it's helpful to think about preparing kits for the car and to practice using them and share the location of the kit with somebody in your network, like a neighbor or another caregiver or family members, so that they know where to grab it in a hurry. And it's not something that's just hidden in your closet that only you know about. All right. If you're going to shelter in place or evacuate, that is kind of a decision that sometimes comes up. So thinking about if there's storms, are all your loose objects secured? Are there window protections if you're in an area where you get a lot of windy storms? Or if there's going to be storms coming, are you prepared to not have electricity if you're still going to shelter in place? So, do you have options available for lights? Do you have options available to heat water or to get water? Remove any hazards that might be. And then ensure that exits are well lit, clear, and accessible, and label essential rooms. And that can be useful normally as people's memory changes. But again, if it becomes darker, things change. It's often harder to see, but that's where also it's harder to see the labels, right? So it's kind of an interesting compromise. Where possible, keep your daily routines consistent. Use familiar foods where possible. So again, thinking about what you've put as being able to prepare if the electricity went out. If it's something where you still have electricity, thinking about is this something where keeping the news on and having it available increases the anxiety, right? And am I better off putting something calming on? Or do I need to look at using headphones or white noise blockout? For us, it's really difficult sometimes when an emergency comes to actually stay calm. But if we have a plan, it's going to be a little easier. But staying calm is really going to help our loved one be able to maintain some calmness themselves and have less anxiety and fear. Use very simple explanations and just minimal. Use visual cues and again, monitor for wandering and agitation. Notify people that you are going to shelter in place and that you may have someone if evacuation becomes necessary where you need assistance. So again, talking about planning for power outages, have battery powered lights, radios, fans, prepare backup power options for medical equipment, keep emergency contacts and supplies accessible. And then the other one is looking at temperature changes. So if it's going to be really hot, have we thought about options for maintaining the temperature that's comfortable in the home, or the same if it happens during really cold weather, because that can also trigger anxiety and fear. When to evacuate? Evacuate early. And I think that is something that people don't do at all. We kind of leave it to the last minute, but you're going to end up much more stressful and traffic is going to make it much more difficult. So in this situation, it is better to go earlier when an evacuation order is issued, or if you're feeling unsafe and you want to look at evacuating, that you go as soon as possible. But when you do, let someone know that that's what you've done, right? Now, map out evacuation routes in advance and then thinking about, have you talked to your local shelter? And this is something that's really important to look at. Who is operating that local shelter and what are the emergency options are? And this is potentially something that the group could do as well, so that then we know from a group perspective what are going to be the better shelters that have an environment that are going to allow for caregiver support in the bathrooms or caregiver support in the living situation, or that are going to have some calmer areas, or even potentially have some other support systems in place. So that's one of the things we really want to push our emergency planning agencies around us to actually be able to plan to meet the needs that we have, so that those are covered, and we know that at least one shelter in our area is going to be able to support us. Practice. This one's really hard. Um, because how do you do this when it's not there? But thinking about what that would look like, can I simulate some of those things? Does the to-go bag work? Or can I manage without electricity for one meal, or for, one evening for reading? Excuse me. And assign clear roles to caregivers to help you with that. Make sure that you've reviewed the to-go bag. One of the things definitely is wandering increases at this. And it's really sad. I had a client, and his wife and him had lost his brother, and they were flying over for the memorial service. And when they were at the airport, um, when there was the stopover on the way, she needed to go to the bathroom, and she left the gentleman outside the women's bathroom. And when she came out, he wasn't there. So, thinking in such an unusual situation, not knowing what's where, unable to remember why they were standing outside this strange place, they wandered off. So, looking at how can we, prepare for situations like that. And that's where asking in the shelter, is it going to be an option for like a family bathroom? Is there going to be someone who can stay with my loved one while I need to take a shower or do those kinds of things? Thinking about asking for that information and planning in advance. Use simple, short instructions, offer lots of reassurance. And again, sometimes having people be able to engage in a task. So, even in a shelter, folding napkins, if they're capable of being able to doing that, or any of the simple things they may be able to do, can give them a sense of control or engagement a little bit. Let's talk about some safety strategies. Again, the ID bracelets, looking at wandering, safe return programs. I know the Alzheimer's Association has a safe return program. Thinking about door alarms and locks. So again, talking to the shelters about that option if you're going to look at your local shelter supports, so that they have these in place in at least one area in the shelter where it's going to be safe for you to be able to go. And then inform trusted neighbors about wandering. Again, I'm going to say also work with the local emergency departments, police and fire department to notify that as well. And fire department is also a good place to inform if you're going to need assistance to evacuate. My son-in-law is a volunteer for a couple of fire departments and has been in the one here locally, and they said they can put a note about that you will need assistance, and that will notify them if the evacuation order comes. That will support that. Again, stay calm, short sentences, visual cues, pictures. So have some of those in advance. Potentially use headphones or soft music to block out the noises and minimize the distress. I can't emphasize that enough. As you can see, as we've been going through here, if you panic, they're going to panic, and it's going to be much more difficult. Again, bring comfort items. If they have a blanket, stuffed animal, photo album, something that they like, that they're engaged in. Maintain routines as much as you can. So medication times, rest times, meal times, those are all going to be important. And again, where possible, use distractions. So any simple activities. And this is where preparing your kid is going to be important. What activities could you engage in that are going to help as a distraction and keep them calm? And that's something to also put on that list, but it's very difficult to engage in those activities if you don't have the supplies included in your kit. So that's going to be key. Offer frequent comfort and validation, avoid arguing or correcting. And so just that reassurance is so important, and you staying calm. Monitor for signs of distress and agitation, because that is going to be really key. But the other thing is, how can you get help? So again, thinking about with the shelter, asking what support is going to be there, or thinking about where can you get that if you needed to evacuate from home, and then document any changes in behavior that I've seen. And note that for a time, you're going to probably observe some decrease in their abilities to respond to things. All right, building a support network is really important. So there are some special needs registries. And again, this is where you can look at what is available in your area. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's here in Clark County. And then why register? Because that way emergency responders are aware of your needs and they can prioritize assistance, and they don't have to come looking for you. It's better for them to be able to be aware. And this includes, like I said, PUD, sheriff, police, emergency response, CRESA, and also the fire department. Some people I know don't like to provide that information. Some of them have where it's confidential file and it's only opened in situations. So those are all the questions you can ask. And then examples, also register with the Alzheimer's Association Safe Return Program or Medic Alert Safe Return Program. So some of the community resources are HOPE, of course, but also those we talked about, emergency contacts, support networks. So make sure you have people outside immediately that you can have check on you or know that will come to assist you in the time of an emergency. Sometimes there's some good, responsible neighbors, relatives, friends, people that you know from church or other groups that you might be in, members of this group, right? You can check on each other and make sure that you have an agreed on way if the phones are down, because in North Carolina, that was a big issue. That we just recently had, cell phones were down. So it wasn't until, and I know this may get some people upset, but until Elon Musk put the Starlink satellite in there that communications were restored. And that took him 2 days. So just thinking about what those options are. And then those local alerts. Again, coming back to those first responders, I keep jumping ahead on this. But again, it's really important to let them know what's happening and to understand if there's a sensitive issue. So if your loved one's prone to wandering, are they fearful if a police car was to come up behind them, right? If someone notifies them that they've seen someone that they think looks like them, would it be better for them to send an unmarked car and have them send a plainclothes officer, right? Sharing a photo list of medications, calming strategies. It's often helpful, and there's some training videos related to this for first responders, that if they know something about their interests, their loved ones, their habits, it helps them be able to respond to that person and ask questions or tell them that they know, I know your son, or here's the name, those kinds of things. So that's really helpful for de-escalating the system and having them not be as anxious. Really, again, seek out those people around you and in your support group here that you can trust to check in on you, that you can trust as a group that you can work with. It's really important to take care of yourself in this situation and thinking about yourself. So what are signs of burnout and stress? And we're probably experiencing some of those before we have to deal with an emergency and a disaster situation. So making sure that you are taking care of that because it affects your health, but it also impacts how you can respond successfully and take care of yourself and a loved one in this situation. In really thinking about making sure you act on that early, because otherwise the situation is not going to be ongoing and sustainable. If it means respite care, shared responsibilities, and asking for help, it's going to be really important to do that. And I'm sure this has been emphasized at other times in this group. Keep your own list of emergency contacts for you, right? List of friends, support, people who are going to check in on you. Make sure in that emergency kit you have stuff stored for you and your phone and your self-care items that you may need, including something for managing stress and for a change of clothes. So your well-being and you being prepared for the emergency is going to be just as important and in some ways more important than the person that you're caring for. And quick tips again is short breaks, um, deep breathing, mindfulness, praying, reading, those things that you need that will help you keep calm. Stay connected with others. Don't isolate. And I'll go back again to the situation with Gene Hackman and his wife. It was weeks before someone found out that the situation had happened. And that was because they had isolated themselves. So, thinking about maintaining those connections with other people in this group, having people at church who are in on you or other groups that you're in. Celebrate your small successes. Be kind to yourself, right? Even though we're talking about preparedness, this doesn't have to be done tonight. Cressa, and I will give you a copy of this presentation and I will go through some planning lists in a minute. But Creza is one place you can reach out to. They also have an emergency guide kit and some lists of what you can do. This is the agency that you need to talk to about what's in the shelters. And this may be something as a group, you can reach out to them and have that discussion with them about it. Washington State Health Department offers some as well as ready.gov. I know we've talked before about some options for kits, but I'm going to give you a checklist as well. The VA also has some stuff on their website that's available free on disaster and emergency preparedness for caregivers and has a whole list of options in there as well. And it's really important to maintain social connections, not only for you and your health and getting support, but as part of disaster preparedness. It's not only about stockpiling food, medications, or having your kit ready. It's also paying attention to who you can look out for and who can look out for you, and making sure that that works. All right. Do we have any questions on that part before I go into the kit preparation?
I do have some questions.
Yes.
So let's see. What about Smart 911?
Um, Absolutely. Not all communities have them, but I think Clark County has. So absolutely using those systems that are available.
Can um, can you mention where that is from? We've talked about that some in our groups. Is that a CRESA program?
Yes, I'm pretty sure that Cresser operates the 911 system. So I'm pretty sure that's their system.
There is a comment, maybe talking with someone away from the home about making them a contact person if there's an emergency and letting others know. For example, this person has a brother as an emergency contact to let him know where you are if there's an emergency. And then kids or others know to contact them if they can't contact you.
Absolutely. And the other thing is sometimes having someone out of the area, right?
Right.
if you're able to contact them because they're not impacted by the disaster, so they're going to have some options available in terms of letting the rest of the family or other people know. That's always good to have that on the list.
Are there basic emergency kits that you can order that you can recommend, or kits
There
that we
are
can add to?
there are some, and I can pull some up in a minute to show you. They will need things added to them. And, we've talked about in here, and like I said, I'll give you the copy to send out because there's a list of things about, what to put in there related to what calms me down, what I might get aggravated about, what my normal routine is. So some of those things you'll want to add as well as the special items or the photo album or those medication lists. But there are some basic kits that you can get. But thinking about how unique some of that is in terms of food preference and in terms of water stuff. But there are definitely kits that are there. And in fact, I think Walmart just had, was it Walmart? Amazon just had a sale for a meal kit that could be used easily. But again, is it something you would eat? So that is just something to think about when you look at like those meal preparation kits. But in this situation where we don't have a lot of time and we're stressed, it may be just as easy to go buy one of those where they're on sale and deal with the unfamiliar meal option than the extra stress right now with you having to think about how to put all that together, right?
Sure. And then should everyone have a go bag? Is that something that you would recommend?
Yes, because thinking about in that go bag, you're going to need um, your own medication list. You're going to need your own some clothing options. You're going to want to have some different things that you can use for stress reduction, right? And so, yes, there should be at least, or at least if it's combined, that your things are considered. But then it gets too big, and then thinking about should I have food in that? And we're going to talk a little bit about that in terms of a car kit in a minute as well.
Okay. So those are the questions that I had, so you can go on.
All right, let me just go back to sharing the screen. So I have put this list together for you here. And it just talks about how can I go through some of these things that were have looked at. And you could pick off one a month, you could pick off one a week. It depends on what time you have available. But there is a list here. Are my smoke and fire alarms all in place? Is my carbon monoxide detector in place? The other thing to think about now, if you're traveling to motels or whatever, there are some small carbon monoxide detectors that are portable now that you can take with you because there have been several deaths recently across the country here, actually, from people staying in motels where they have been near like the pool room, and that has sucked the carbon monoxide into their hotel room. And they're very inexpensive. If I remember correctly, they were like $14 or $20 for this portable kit. So just thinking those are something there. A weather alarm system if we have an emergency or emergency alarms. Do you have a fire extinguisher or a fire blanket in your home? Right? Because that can actually put the fire stuff out. And I would say, do you have that in your car as well? Uh, have we contacted these agencies? So thinking if we're using power chair, do I need transportation? Do I need to let them know? Do I need transportation anyway? Do I have difficulties with driving? And so have I let them know that in an emergency or where there was evacuation orders, I would need assistance? Have I reached out to the emergency shelter? Again, that may come in with the county emergency response and thinking about the police department, electricity authority, if I have electrical appliances that my life is dependent on, have I reached out to them so I'm on the priority list for reconnection? Okay.
So can I
And so,
interrupt a sec?
yes.
So about emergency shelters, are you aware if something should occur, are you aware of places that think about people that have high needs, such as dementia or people who need oxygen
So
or
So this has been a conversation we've been having. So the shelters are starting to be more aware. This is now becoming part of their planning. But I would reach out if you needed oxygen or if you needed particular equipment. I would reach out to the shelter planning so that they can take that into account when they're looking at meeting those needs or having a trial, where they do those mock situations so that that can be incorporated. And what's interesting is that in Cowlitz County, it's a long way away from where I am because I'm in Cowlitz County, just across the river, and they don't have a plan or a shelter nearby. So that's really difficult to look at. All right, so here is my 7-day home disaster plan checklist, right? Do I have, and I've put pictures here to help, do I have options for lighting and cooking? Are there adaptive equipment that I need that I can use without electricity? Do I need communication issues, calming, leisure, toileting, food, drink, other special needs? And this is my emergency kit version of it now, right? And you could start just, filling in 1 week here and then putting it together so that you've looked at those options. And then here is the checklist for all of this information. Here is ways to look about some of the concerns that I have, equipment I need with me, I communicate best by, and my medical providers and my medical insurance. So that is that one kit there. Any questions about that? Do you think this worksheet would be helpful?
my only comment is related to where you have medications,
It's
the
not big
number
enough.
that it's not big enough. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yes.
That's the
And
only thing that I really notice.
yeah, and then it can be listed more down here.
Yes, that's helpful.
Yeah. So, yes, it's hard because I know that they're saying by the time we're 60, what are we on? 305 medications each, and it gets more each year. So, all right. So, this is the one for home. So, I'm happy to share this and you can work on it. And even if it starts your thinking and it doesn't have everything on it, it's at least, if you do this basic part, you're going to be steps ahead of more than 80% of the other people, right? Did this change to the car kit? Lynn, did the screen change?
Oh, I did. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. I just want to make sure because sometimes it's delayed or does it. So this is just some things to think about for putting in the car. Um, my car kit needs to be updated right now, and so I'm working through this list as well. And thinking about what applies to you. And again, we went hiking on the weekend and realized I don't have any toilet paper left in the car, which would have been kind of interesting if it was needed. Thinking about, do I have any note paper? Just simple things that we can grab at the dollar store one day or when we're at the grocery store if we have it on the checklist. Um, it doesn't happen so much here, but I have been caught in a blizzard on I-90 before in Pennsylvania. And the snow was coming down so hard that the snowplows had no possible way of keeping up. And so it was inches deep and slid into a rest area, and that's where I was stuck for the night. And I woke up in the morning and needed to shovel out about 18 inches of snow. So thinking about if I had not had a sleeping bag in my car and had not had my down coat with me and shoes that I could walk in the snow in, it would have been a very extremely uncomfortable night. And then if I had not had a snow shovel. So thinking about what are potential scenarios around here where you could get caught in your car. And I put the masks here because one of the situations for us could be again an explosion at Mount St. Helens, right? And we got a lot of air pollution in that. It could be a bushfire where we had a lot of smoke again, and people are sensitive to that. So, thinking about what situations could I be facing that would be important. One of the things around here, of course, would be how do I stay dry if I have to leave the car? Though this April has been relatively dry. The good news was I had water and some food because I actually did pack a winter emergency kit for my car. But do I have a small window hammer to get out? Are there any other things that I may need? So thinking about how that may be helpful for our vehicles. And I think that's it that I have. Is this being helpful? Is there anything else that we have questions related to?
Well, I actually found it extremely helpful because there are lots of things that I've never thought about. So everyone else, this is an opportunity to ask your questions, and I can actually allow you to speak just by if you raise your hand.
Yeah, and please give me feedback on how helpful because, if there's things I need to change so that it works, it's really important. And I think the key is having the checklist just by, you can just tackle small pieces at a time, right? Because it's overwhelming otherwise. The other thing is you can also ask family for Christmas or whatever presents related to this as well. This is actually what my family did last year for Christmas. We all actually helped each other put together our emergency kits. No questions?
I am not seeing questions. I do know that I had done a little bit of false advertising here that I wonder if you could do a quick and dirty home safety. I know that
Uh,
this is really your expertise, and I get questions or need to remind people all the time about things that they need to do to keep their home safe. Can,
maybe if people have questions, as
I
well.
have a thank you, excellent information, which absolutely.
Thanks. Yes, I'm thinking, well, I try to pull up some info on for home mods that we can go through. If people have any specific questions about home safety or things that have come up that they would like to talk about, absolutely feel free to put those in here. Sure.
One of the things that I would love for you to talk about is something that we talked about just before we came on was walkers, about stability, walking around the house, and what happens when people with dementia are using walkers. And I really appreciated what you had to say, and I think that people that are on this call would appreciate that as well.
So the hardest thing is our memory changes, is then if we make changes to our routines or our habits, it's really difficult for us to be able to adjust to them. And so if we're seeing changes in balance or changes in other stuff, it's better to add things earlier so that our brain has time to adjust than to leave it until later when it's much more difficult. Now, having said that, obviously you don't want to be using a walker if you don't need it, but having someone maybe practice with it for it is one thing. The other thing, though, is it can become an obstacle very quickly if you're picking it up and carrying it around, or if you're tripping over it because you are not aware how to use it. And so it's often safer not to have the walker, but to think about things like putting up handrails, grab bars, and those options. The issue we talked about is how to make them obvious to someone, right? And still keep it look aesthetically pleasing. So there are ways that it can be done with the now the word just disappeared from my brain. Where you put the uh cover across the side of the drywall, like in hallways, wainscoting, um, where you can put some of a rail built into that. So it looks very nice and aesthetically pleasing. You can have colors that don't blend in, but still don't look garish in that. But you want something that people are going to be able to attend to. Now, of course, the best colors for that are red and green. But we were discussing red and green handrails down our hallway are probably not something we want to do. So, how do we blend them in, but still make them stand out? So, that's the conversation related to that. I think the other big one is technology, and we were talking about that with some OTs just before I came on here. That things like adding in remote controlled options that weren't used before, or looking at now we have lights on remotes, or now we have fans on remotes, or we have things controlled by our iPads or our phones. Unless we're used to using those, again, introducing technology like that at this stage can be very difficult for us to use as our memory changes. So just being aware of matching that learning skill, and it's often better to again make those changes earlier while our loved one has the ability to learn, or otherwise looking at simple safety things. One of the things that becomes a big problem is where switches and lights are behind couches or behind other furniture items that you have to walk around or stretch over. And so thinking about how can we change that early on. Um, Adequate lighting is definitely a big thing. And automated night lights are definitely something I would highly recommend. Those are something you don't have to get used to, right? But it's very simple, and there's a lot of really nice automated lights that can be installed now without having to do major home renovations, but don't affect our sleeping. Um, I have some actually in my house that go down the hallway and into the hall bathroom and guest bathroom. So when guests are there because they're in an unusual place, that works. Those are simple, very easily available on Amazon. But if you have steps, there are nice ones for steps that plug and play basically as well. So that's one big thing I can think of. Are there any other questions or areas that you are thinking of? Bathrooms definitely are a big issue.
I,
And
that's exactly what my next question was going to be related to continence. So that becomes such a huge issue for people. And I wonder if that's something that in your new business, if that's something that you discuss with OTs, is training about about continence care.
yes, and because that's such a thing that leads to falls, one, and leads to caregiver fatigue. So I have a friend right now who's going through this. Her mom, her dementia has worsened, and she's not safe getting up by herself at night and attending to those needs, but she still gets up 3 or 4 times through the night. And you don't want to discourage that because of the risk of urinary tract infection, which is going to affect cognition even more as well as health. So the issue becomes what works in your situation, and it's so individual. And that's the key. I haven't come up with any real new tricks. What I have come up with is just looking at how do we protect the bedding? How do we protect the mattress? How do we look at what's happening with urgency, making sure if there's any changes in what's happening, that we're looking at ruling out anything like a UTI, but thinking also about when we drink fluids, right? And one of the big things, of course, with changes in memory is people remembering to drink. And so trying to think about pushing those liquids earlier in the day and not later in the day. And by pushing, I mean making them available, putting the glass where they can see them, encouraging cues and reminders to drink. And then putting some later in the day so we have less urinary output. But the kidneys function at night is to clear a lot of that out. So the biggest issues are the volume, usually. And so, how do we adjust to that volume thing? I know people have talked about things like PureWick for women, but that becomes a problem again in terms of safety, in terms of people getting up. So usually the thing is looking at other pads inside the liners, looking at supports getting up, the night lights, making sure the bathroom equipment is there. There's no mats in the way, those kind of components, and working with the individual family members and clients related to their habits and routines.
And do you ever recommend installing a bidet? And if so, are there particular ones that you would recommend?
Oh, so that's something again that might be useful to put in earlier. Um, and yes, their Bidet King has a couple that are really good. And the reason I like those is that they have a remote control option as well, so that the caregiver can use it without being in a compromised situation. And there's two reasons to look at a bidet. One is that it helps with the cleaning aspect. The other one is that if you're bending over to care to take care of the hygiene and adjust clothing, the stresses on your back in that situation are not good. And the repetitive use of the repetitive task of that whole cleaning component occurs when the acute angle on your back is going to actually trigger more of the back injuries. So the bidet becomes important not only from the cleanliness of the person who's having the issues, but also the caregiver safety and health. So absolutely, I would recommend a bidet. The ones that I would recommend, again, you can get where if the person goes in by themselves, you can get where they actually have a light, which can be important for gentlemen and people to target at night where to sit. And you can also get ones with a remote control so that the caregiver can operate it without having to bend over or clean with that. You want one that has a heating system in it, and you want one that has an adjustable length and spray time, because often, depending on where you're sitting, and male or female, you may not be able to get cleanliness in the right time. And this is also where oval versus round toilets are important. If we're talking about gentlemen being able to get their privates inside the space and looking at that cleaning. How do you support standing if they usually stand to urinate versus sitting? So having to think through that whole unique process. And then the other component is adjustable fan speed on it so that you have warm air to dry. Bidet King offers the most reasonable pricing and looking at those components with it. And I actually have talked to the owner of the daycare. He's come on and talked to the therapist about it. But we're about to install one in our own home because my husband has some significant arthritis in his wrist. And so this is going to help him out.
Thank you.
I
So,
hope that was
of course,
helpful.
I have to get back to falls because
Yes.
that's one of our biggest concerns. Part of it is one of the questions is the shuffling issue. You know, regardless of what kind of dementia it is, as it becomes more progressed, everybody shuffles, and that becomes an issue related to rugs and other edges, and then the handrails for the outside is another question. And then occupational therapy home visits for fall risk. What what does that mean? When should you do it? What do they do when they come?
Okay, so the let's go back to the flooring surfaces and shuffling. There is some thought, and this occurs in Parkinson's as well, with some of the cognitive changes, is does a light and a step in front help? The results with dementia have been mixed, in terms of that shuffling. If they have a Parkinson's form of dementia, having a line in front of them to step to actually has been found to be helpful. And there's many ways that can be done. There's a little light that can be connected to a walker. If they're using a walker, there's a little light that can be connected and puts a little laser line in front to a belt. That will help with that with the Parkinsonians type. With other forms of cognitive changes, there have been mixed results on using that. Sometimes there's some thoughts that having patterned where there's squares on the flooring helps with taking bigger steps. But again, not all of us want to have a chess set or board for our flooring and trying to think, which is why the light was one that it's used. Having rugs down there definitely is an issue and becomes a big fall risk with the shuffling. Carpet itself becomes a fall risk because your foot catches on it, and then the footwear. You want a non-slip footwear, but you don't want it too non-slip that it's catching. And it's the same with the floor. You want a non-slip flooring surface, and particularly in the bathroom, there's a non-slip surface called coefficient of slip, which some of the tiles and stuff are coming out with now. You want it to be above 0.62, which is the ADA rating for it. But if it's higher than that, then your foot catches as well. So then you can increase the falls. So you want to get it non-slip enough, but you don't want it too non-slip because we're going to increase the risk. And that happens when we apply home applications of Slip Doctor over it that are too thick. So just that's the compete on that. The transitions can be changed out. So if you have the higher bump transition where you're going from carpet to a solid floor surface, those a handyman can change to either no, depending on how it's done, or to a very low profile transition. And that's important. Sliding doors is another one where a significant 1 inch transition occurs. So we can use some threshold ramps there. Again, they can bump up against those, but when it's not a sudden stop, the foot tends to adjust a little more. So those are easily available and that can be used. I usually prefer to use hard flooring surfaces throughout the house and remove the rugs in that situation. And what was the other thing? That was the flooring. We were going to talk about the occupational therapist coming, right?
Right, and there was also a question related to handrails for outside. Where do you put them? What,
So handrails for outside when like stepping downstairs or walking around on outside surfaces.
all of the above.
Okay. So
Going
again,
into the house, for
mm,
example.
so again, it's going to depend on how wide that entrance is. In some situations where we have like a 6 foot wide step system that comes up from like a back deck or something like that, I may put a rail in the middle of the step so that coming up or down, you can use it and reach it, and it's very obvious. Putting it on the sides, it can be done, but it's really going to depend on how frequently and how many steps, what kinds of options are there. But in most situations, even if you're coming onto concrete or coming off with just a single step down, you can either attach it to the wall. There are some angled bars now that will come out off the wall, or you can attach it to the surface where it's coming onto. And there are some nice angled wrought iron ones that are relatively inexpensive that can be used in that situation for stepping down. One of the things, of course, is that making sure the concrete or the surface that they're coming down onto is not cracked and is smooth. And that's really hard if we're having like pavers and stuff there. So it's much easier for coming onto a concreted surface. And then thinking about why are we going outside, right? What are the reasons we're there, and how do we make that whole occupation or task safer? So it really means analyzing what's happening that we're going outside for so that that pathway or the activity then gets changed to be safer. Did that answer your question, Lynn?
It did. And then the question about having occupational therapy come out to assess the home for fall risk.
Okay, so the best way is to look at someone who, an occupational therapist who's skilled in that. And then the other component of it is thinking about if we've experienced changes that are related to a medical condition um, that has recently occurred in terms of a change or a progression or whatever, um, it would be considered medically necessary by Medicare, which sets the guidelines for most of the insurances. They'll follow Medicare guidelines to a degree. And then that would be a covered evaluation. If the Medicare beneficiary has fallen once and injured themselves in the last 12 months, or they've fallen twice without an injury, that's definitely a covered situation. If, let's just say it's me and I want an occupational therapist to come and look at my home because I'm getting older and I wanted to prepare in advance, Medicare has decided in their wisdom that they don't cover prevention. So that kind of aging in place prevention evaluation is generally not covered under our health insurances. Now, if we are talking about, we're thinking potentially about moving on to Medicaid for that person, and we're needing to have a spend down, right? And this may apply in some situations. Then home modifications for safety with a recommendation by an occupational therapist are an acceptable spend down um, for the Medicaid that occurs within that 5 years. The occupational therapist should come out and meet with the person who's having the issues. They should do an evaluation of their function. They should see them in the situation that's creating some concerns. And then they will probably do a bunch of measurements and take pictures and then make recommendations. Generally, I would suggest that you can either make the recommendations there. Sometimes it's straightforward. Sometimes I may need to research some items and come back. So there'd be a second visit. And then it would really depend if we're talking about adaptive equipment that may make that job or that task easier, or if we're talking about um, using or having a handyman or someone come and make some changes. For example, widening a doorway, changing a hinge, installing a grab bar, adding a ramp, right? And going back to going outside, depending on how big the steps are and where we're going, a ramp with a handrail may actually be a good option as well, and a good long-term option. So that again would be part of the whole assessment, and then coming back and making sure those were successful and training any needs or stuff with it. Now, how is that covered? It's covered generally under outpatient therapy, but it really depends on how the therapist is employed. To get home health, you're supposed to be homebound except for medical appointments and religious services. So, again, those would be outpatient services. If you are homebound, an outpatient therapist can't come at the same time, and that would be private pay, and the prevention would be private pay. Does that answer the information that you need?
Yeah, that was really helpful. Um, so another question is related to the adult child whose parent is living alone and they feel strongly that they are not safe to live alone. I'm thinking about one particular woman whose mom has had two incidents with the stove.
Oh, there are ways around that.
Uh, so
There,
there's my question.
so
Suggestion.
yeah, so definitely things like there is now equipment that we can get installed really simply that will automatically turn the stove off if someone's not there within 10 minutes. There's some that detect smoke really easily. There are ways to do things that will allow some safe use and reduce the fire risk. Those options are not super expensive. They're becoming more and more easily accessible and affordable as time goes on. So there are ways around those problems to still keep someone at home. There gets, of course, to be a point, right, where we need to look at that. So the OT can do an assessment to look at when is that risk too high. And then there are ways even because the other option becomes medication management, right? There's stove, there's bathroom, and there's medication issues that become concerns, then driving and wandering. So we've got all of those things in that same bundle. There are medication dispensers that will only dispense the specific ones for that time of the day, and that's all that's available. And they're locked, so they cannot get any other medications out because it's very typical to either forget them or take double doses because you forgot you took them or you forgot them and then think you need to make up for them. And so there's all of these complications that are safety related to medication that can be managed as well in that situation.
So are you aware of a dispenser that reminds them to take their medication?
Yes, yeah. So that
Verbally
same that
reminds them?
same that same dispenser verbally reminds them, and also depending on the watch, they can be connected to the watch to also give a vibration or a verbal reminder from there. Yeah, so it will give an alarm that will do that, and it will only release that time's medication.
Okay. And do you have information related to that particular tool?
Yes, I'll have to go pull it up in my resource list, but yes, I do have it, so you can email me for it.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, there is a lot of being safe in their own home issues that we talk about a lot. And the assessment that you describe to determine when maybe it's not okay for them to still be there, can you speak to that a little bit?
So there are some tools that occupational therapists can use. One is, observation and having them perform some tasks. There's some tasks related to, there's a couple of assessments that have tasks related to medication management, to some of the cognitive skills. And there's something called the Allen cognitive levels, and it involves a task that seems really bizarre. It's leather lacing, but it really is looking at problem solving. And that can also give us an indication about how much support the person is going to need at home to stay there safely and when it becomes unsafe.
Okay. Yeah, that is actually the tool that we used in the hospital to
Mhm.
determine if the people were safe to go home. So,
Yeah, I generally use that, the slums, and there's a medication management one and an observation tool.
okay. Okay. So if anybody has any other questions related to home safety, now's the time because we're going to let Sue go. This has been hugely helpful. And
Oh,
you taught me a tremendous amount about disaster preparedness, so I really appreciate it.
no problem. And, if you want me to come back and do some more in-depth home safety stuff, save up some of the questions and the concerns, I'm happy to do that.
Well, it seems to be something that we talk about a lot, but I have to tell you what we don't talk about. We talk about a backup plan, in case something happens to the caregiver, that sort of thing. But what we really, or at least I would say that I have never talked about, is a disaster plan. So this was so helpful. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and so Lynn, I will email you a copy of the presentation plus those two checklists,
That'd be great.
so that you can email them out to people.
And I will send that out. So excellent.
Mm.
So thank you so much. So just so that everyone knows, our next education for the month of May, if you can believe it, it will be May already, will be Benjamin Sermi, who is a social gerontologist who will be talking about global innovations in dementia care. And that includes, when he says global, he's talking about international. And it's pretty interesting, some of the things that are happening around the world. So everybody try to attend that if they can. And again, thank you, Sue, so much.
You're welcome. And don't forget to send me the invite for that one too.
I absolutely will. All right, and everybody, this is recorded, so there will be a YouTube video that we will put on as long as you give us permission. Have to remember to ask permission. But what that does is allows you to share the information that you got today from Sue with your families and even your person who has dementia. So thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.
All right. You got some thank yous there. So I appreciate it.
Thank
Have a nice
you.
evening.